I've been living out here in rural Mississippi for the past 6 years now, and it's pretty common to hear a variety of different animal noises. Still, I can never pinpoint an animal to the sound that I've been listening to lately. It's pretty common to hear coyotes like that all the time, and my partner wants to say that this was a coyote, but let's be honest. A coyote doesn't sound like a dinosaur screaming. I only hear the sound at night, but it seems like I'm living in Jurassic Park. If you ever have seen the movie Jurassic Park, there are multiple times throughout each film where a dinosaur roars or makes a noise, and it just has this reptilian sound to it, where if you are blindfolded, and even though the T-Rex sound, for example, is made up of a few different tones, if you've ever watched a documentary on the making of it, it still sounds like it's coming from a large reptile or a dinosaur. I'm telling you this and including this in my email because that's the only way I can accurately describe and explain how this sounds. It sounds nothing like a coyote, and my partner seems to want to disagree with me. I don't know if it's because he's scared or what the deal is. It does not sound natural, and it is not anything that I've ever heard before. We live close to a rather large part of swampland, so already that's a strike against us. I've listened to all sorts of weird horror stories about people getting lost in the swamps and all the monsters that are supposed to be living in the swamp. Quote unquote monsters. And then I start hearing this at night. I don't believe monsters are real necessarily. I think I'm probably just hearing an unidentified animal, in my honest opinion. Still, scientifically, I've never heard any animal sound as loud as this, or matching this exact animal's timbre. I don't know how much you know about giant reptiles that live in swamps, but it almost has this hissing quality. As I'm typing this to you, I'm trying to sit here and think of what animal I can explain to you that would make the most sense. If you've ever heard a Komodo dragon, for example, they have this deep roar, angry groan, hiss sound. That's not quite what I'm hearing, but imagine that amplified, with more of a roar, guttural quality behind it. Now you're starting to get close to what I'm hearing. Again, a reptile sounds like a reptile, and there's no mistaking that. I'm sorry if this email is too long. It's just been really scaring me lately. So I thought I would reach out to several different big YouTubers, because with all these stories you guys get sent, I'm sure you get knowledge and are able to clarify some things that might be out there or possibly be unknown to man. A couple of years ago, some friends that we've made since moving up here told us about some Bigfoot encounters they've been having in the same area. Now, I'm not a believer in Bigfoot by any means, but their encounters and sightings were frightening with how they'd retell their stories. I guess Bigfoots run rampant out here, but I didn't know that before moving out here. I thought to myself that it could be a Bigfoot that I'm hearing out here in the swamps at night, but from what I've been told, and from what little I know about Bigfoot in general, they don't sound reptilian. Maybe they do. Hopefully you can answer me and reply. Perhaps it's an entirely new discovered species of animal that's only living here in the Mississippi swampland. I have held on to this encounter for a very long time, and I haven't told anybody about it because I fear I would be mocked and called crazy. But maybe it's about time for me to finally share my experience with the world. After listening to all the stories people have shared with you, it's really encouraged me to step up and share what happened to me back in the late summer of 1979 in Columbus, Mississippi. Your video series about reptilians is precisely what I wanted to talk about. Until recently, the past 6 months, I had no idea that there was anybody else out there who has seen a creature like I have. People talk about Bigfoot, and even I've heard about a thing called a Mothman, but I never would have guessed that other people have seen large reptilian humanoid creatures just like I did. I thought I was crazy because I thought I was the only one. I've never been into conspiracies or wanting to dive down that rabbit hole, but the more I listen to some of these stories, the more real this all makes it seem, and the more it all brings me back to that evening. I could tell you, it was July 10th in 1979, and it was beginning to get dusk. I lived out of a small house that I was rooming with a few friends. I'd only been there for around a few months, and by nature, I'm a small town boy from Colorado. So a few friends of mine moved out here to start up a small business, and they really wanted me on the team to work in their department. I didn't have a job at the time, so I thought it would have been the perfect fit. Rooming with some friends, working at the same position. We could party and work together. What more of a life could you want at only 22 years old? Now, you need to understand something. At the time where I was living, it wasn't fully developed like everything is nowadays with stores and businesses everywhere. Commercial real estate in general has very much expanded in just about every area. Back then, this was about as rural as you can get, with only a few plots of land here and there, and with houses sparsely spread. At the time, there was only a few other houses in the area, with mainly large empty fields and thick woods all around. You bet it was humid as hell. Our drive to work was approximately 25 minutes, which we enjoyed, because that means we could party and be as loud as we want to, without having angry neighbors calling the police on us. In fact, that's actually one of the reasons why we decided to go in and rent this house together. If you look out from the front door, it goes out all the way to the front road, and beyond that, it dips down in a small embankment to a thick grassy field that goes on for acres and acres into more and more denser woods. You can call it an empty meadow, because the only thing that's really there is probably some marshland and some really, really tall grass. At the time, there was zero development, and the closest house is probably a half-mile down the road in either direction. Again, perfect for young kids in early 20s to party without disturbing anybody purposefully. And might I say that at that age, I drank like a pirate. At the time of the sighting, though, I was stone cold sober, and I really want to hone in on that. I was the only one home at the time, because my few other roommates were out doing something, I don't remember what. Probably out chasing girls like they always did when they weren't working. I was usually the more reserved one. I was outside having a cigarette, and I see this giant lizard stand up from the tall grass in the field opposite of the side of the house. I stared at it intently for a few seconds, just trying to comprehend what I was looking at. Then, it turned its head, and its whole body followed. It slowly began walking towards the woodline, which was probably about a few hundred yards. I watched this thing walk all the way towards the woodline before finally entering and disappearing. This thing looked like a Komodo dragon crossed with a human. It was dark and scaly looking and had long arms. It did have a tail, but because the grass was so tall, its lower body was obscured. I almost dropped my cigarette and thought to myself I'd just seen a lizard man. When I was outside smoking my cigarette and happened to see it, I wasn't necessarily looking for anything. I was just kind of spacing out, looking off in the distance, thinking about my day, when this thing rises up out of the tall grass. It was tall though, because that grass is easily 3 feet tall, and it only came up to about mid-thigh to this creature. That meant that it was probably around 7 to 8 feet tall, and it had a massive reptile head. I don't know if it actually saw me, or didn't, and just chose to ignore me, but it never looked over at me, and it's not like I was obscured by any trees or bushes. I was out there in the open, this small, tiny, skinny guy. We don't have any trees anywhere on the house of the yard, so I was sticking out if it would have looked over. I don't know if it was hunting or what it was doing, but it was obviously there before I even came out with a cigarette, crouching down in the grass. I was out there for probably 5 to 7 minutes before I saw this thing stand up and walk off. When it walked, it was just like a human. It had a very natural glide with long strides. It was incredibly muscly, and there wasn't, or at least looked to be, an ounce of fat on that thing at all. You could tell by the muscle mass that it was strong. It never made a noise, and I never smelled anything either. After it vanished into the trees, I dropped my cigarette like I said, and ran inside because even though I was in total awe at what I saw, I was pretty freaked out. I had no idea that we had upright walking lizards out here. Like I said, just being a small town boy from Colorado, this was way out of my environment. I didn't tell any of my friends when they got home later that night, and I kinda kept this encounter to myself for a really long time. But I do think about it from time to time. All these reptilian accounts you've been posting over the last few months have really brought me back to that moment, and I figured it was time for me to share mine. Now I know many of the accounts you share explain vastly different creatures, most of them acting very hostile and aggressive. While I don't think I saw any of those creatures you told, I definitely can stand behind the fact that it was an upright walking reptilian humanoid creature. It was very tall and enormous. I never saw it again after that, because the following year, I moved back to Colorado. Anyway, thank you for letting me share my experience with you. I saw something that really alarmed me on the night of October 16th, 2016. It looked like a dog or a wolf. It was on its hind legs, kind of leaning up against a tree. When I saw it, it had stepped over a 4-foot barbed wire fence with incredible ease, and then quickly put itself up against the tree as to stay hidden and remained out of view. But I got a good look at it. This thing was busted. I saw it. It had pointed ears, dark in color, and was the overall shape of a werewolf. I got a good look at it for about 2 minutes until it climbed up into the tree. Then it leapt right out of the tree and ran off. I had just stepped outside to go chop up some firewood and get some kindling when that was outside waiting for me. I must have startled it, which is why it tried to hide itself. At the time, I had no idea what I was looking at, but it didn't feel right. I knew right away from the look of it that it was not a natural creature of this very world. I know that whatever I saw scared me so badly that I stayed inside up all night. Then, a couple of weeks later, I went on vacation with my family at the Gulliver Lake in Michigan. It's in the Upper Peninsula. I and my brother would usually take a walk after dinner time. We came across a pond that was very thick with berries and bramble. We stopped to look at them for a while, and then decided to go walk back shortly thereafter. As we're headed back to the house, we saw a very large man-like thing standing under a tree. I thought it was a bear standing on its hind legs at first, but this was much larger. It had what appeared to be a large snout on its face, hence why I thought it was a bear at first. We just left the area shortly after that. My brother and I had zero plans to stick around to see what would happen. Over the course of my time in the state of Michigan, I had witnessed 2 different types of dogmen, a creature I had heard so much about living in the state, and which I never saw until the year of 2016. In a 3-week time span, I saw 2 different variants of the same creature. At the time, I didn't even know there was such a thing as dogman variants, but after listening to Vic Cundev's Dogman Encounters show, that's where I learned that there are different types. I'm thankful that in both situations these creatures never seemed to notice my presence, because had they did, who knows if they would have tried to strike. I have never felt fear in my life had I been around these 2 kinds of creatures. Hello, fellow cryptozoologist. I wanted to share with you my experience, my very own dogman encounter from late last summer in 2019. I was visiting the Cumberland Falls Recreation Area in Kentucky. At the time, I was with this girl that was my girlfriend on and off for the remainder of the year. We broke up indefinitely in November, but that's not relevant to the story. At the time, briefly, we were dating on and off. It was during our time here together that we saw one of these creatures. It was very muscular and very dark, so dark that it stood out clear and plain as day. We were in total awe at what we saw. It was walking by the Cumberland River, and we just happened to catch a glimpse of it in the daylight. That's about it for this encounter. Just wanted to share with you that these things are indeed real, and we need to be aware of our surroundings, regardless whether out in town or out in the woods. Mid-September 2005, July 20th, 2015, and February 21st, 2017. I have had 3 different encounters with 3 different creatures. Maybe they were all the same creature. I know what I saw. When I was younger, I saw what looked to be a big German shepherd on its hind legs, running through a very thick patch of woods. It only happened for a second, but I very much remember the long muzzle and pointed ears distinctly. That sight will never leave my head. It was chasing a big buck that had just ran through the same area only moments before. And when the buck ran through, I could tell it wasn't just running, but running from something. I had no idea that is what I would have seen next. The second encounter was more exciting, at least from a reader's perspective. It was later in the evening, and we were having a small family party/barbecue miles outside of town in an area in Pennsylvania, about 63 miles away from the state border. I had just walked away to the far side of the lot to go pee in the trees because the only bathroom at the time was being remodeled, and you bet yourself I wasn't about to go and use the porta potty. Those things are so nasty, and everybody had been blowing that thing up all day at the barbecue. Thanks, but I'll take my chances in the trees. Just as I was stepping away from the tree line, I heard some branches nearby moving. I turned to see what it was, and I flinched immediately at what I saw. The first thing I noticed was a long muzzle. Do you know what it's like when your eyes see something shocking? It will be like you noticed one detail, and then your eyes slowly trail off to the full thing. That's exactly what happened in this case. I was seeing before me a creature about 7 feet tall, full-figured. This thing was not any further away than 20 feet to maybe 30 feet right there in the trees, staring me down as if I was some injured deer ready to be pounced upon and devoured whole. It would appear to be blackish long fur and a big mane, kind of like how a lion has. The face reminded me of something you would see in a movie. It resembled a human, but it also resembled a wolf. It was very humanistic, especially the cheekbones and how it showed its expression, and the expression on its face was angry. It was using both of its hands to hold onto the trees next to it, as if to pull the trees apart so it could fully see me, and I it. It was the scariest looking thing I've ever seen. It had huge teeth sticking out of its mouth with exaggerated canines. The second we made eye contact, it made an even angrier expression, and then let out a nasty snarl of disapproval. I felt all the blood drain from my body, and I ran cold, even though it was easily 85 to 90 degrees outside. The barbecue we were having, which wasn't too far away, had some music playing through one of those new music boombox devices. If you've never seen one of these semi-large cylindrical speakers that are amazing, they can get pretty loud. We bought ours at Costco, and other places sell them too, but anyway, that had started to play loud music. So this creature looks over in that direction as the music begins playing. Then it looks back at me and slowly backs away into the forest without ever breaking eye contact, not even for a second. But it starts backing away in the direction headed towards where the barbecue area is. Once it fully immersed itself back into the tree line and I couldn't see it anymore, I took off running back towards where the barbecue is being held. One of my friends, one of the ones I invited, made a joke saying, "What's wrong? Did you see a ghost?" Ha ha ha. That's when my family began to notice I was paler than a corpse and was full of anxiety as I was scanning the woods all around us. They thought I was having some sort of schizophrenic episode, even though I'm not schizophrenic at all. My other friend said, "Man, you don't look so good. Why don't you just sit down, relax, have a beer?" He sat me down, handed me a beer, and so I sat there for 20 minutes, not saying a word, full of anxiety, and continuously scanning the wood line meticulously. I was waiting for that thing to appear, or to somewhere along the way pop its head out and show itself, so that way everybody could see it, knowing that it was watching me still, but it never did. I wish I could tell you that this thing came out and charged at us, or something crazy, but that was the end of that encounter, and I never saw it again after that. The last time I would see this thing would have been in the winter of 2017. I don't know if it was the same creature, but it looked very similar. I saw this creature on a Sunday night. After seeing it previous times, I wasn't about to let this thing get to me. Not again. I kept a small pistol on me at all times, and I actually did not have a permit to carry, so shh. I ended up shooting at it a few times, and I screamed something horrible, and it ran off. I'm pretty sure I hit it a few times because I'm not a terrible shot, but it was just a crappy 9mm, and I didn't expect to do any damage with it. I know that a creature of this size and intelligence would only be annoyed by such a tiny, minute weapon. So get this, the thing came back and popped every tire on my tiny car. I woke up around 2:30 in the morning to 4 loud pops, like somebody taking a Bowie knife and jabbing it into each tire. After the 2 pops, I jumped up out of bed, thinking, what is going on? Because I didn't realize the popping sounds I heard were the tires. I jumped to look out my window, and I see that large creature again, what appeared to be biting each tire, and then fleeing. So I ran outside. It's freezing cold, it's winter, I'm in my boxers and a shirt, and I start firing in the air, screaming at it to show itself, because I wasn't about to sit there and let it do whatever it wanted to do. I was going to put a few bullets in its head. It had ran off, but I seriously think that this thing was so intelligent that it came back for revenge and decided to pop my tires with its teeth. Ever since I had my last encounter at that barbecue, it has not left me alone, and it's been bothering me since. It's almost like I've been targeted, and that's the most accurate way I can describe it. I got to the point to where I was sick of it. I regret not having any larger weapons or anything with me, like anything crazy, but I felt like even a 9mm is enough, at least to give it a warning, if not to piss it off more, which is what I probably did.